Constructive Criticism is sponsored by Oasis Games. MTGOasis.com is the place to get cards for your next Magic event. Try them out with code CCMTG for 15% off of your first order, and use the code WouldThatBeGood for 4% off of every order. Want to support the show directly? Head on over to patreon.com/CCMTG to check out some awesome benefits and future goals for the show. Thanks for listening, and here's this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructed Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructedCriticism.com.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 401st episode of Constructed Criticism. I am your host, Mason, joined by my two co-hosts, Abe and Spencer. I threw them for a loop with no fancy adjectives this week.
Is this season 4 of Constructed Criticism? Is that how that works?
No, I think seasons go by hosts.
More than season 4. Not quite anime seasons where we divide it by 23s.
I was actually looking to see if I could find out how many podcasts hit it to episode 400. Us, LR, Spike Feed, Monday Night Magic, the Feed from the Real.
The Maria Bertoli and her co-host.
Well, it depends. Are they one podcast, or did the name change their...
I think the Command Zone's also close, but they did 2 episodes a week for like 2 years, so that catches them up pretty quick.
I would only count weekly podcasts in this. It was interesting. I was like, man, there's not a lot of these. Also, the fact that there is so many in Magic is also impressive. That's a lot of content.
A lot of content.
It is. No, well, I'm about to go to Always Improving because it's the main point of the show. We're going to talk about the Pro Tour. We're going to go all over that, but first we do need to do Always Improving. It's the main point of the show. And Spencer, you are about to hop into it, and the notes have you first, so it's a real 1-2 buckaroo moment.
So I have 2. Are you guys okay with that?
Yeah, I'll allow it.
A couple weeks ago, I had a job interview, and they asked me during the job interview, like, what's the greatest accomplishment of your life? And I got the questions beforehand, and I said it's actually going to happen in a couple days. I'm going to record episode 400 of my Magic podcast. And I got really teary-eyed and eventually started talking about Always Improving and stuff like that. They told me that my answer to that question is why I moved in on the interview process today. And I'm not looking for a job, for those who don't know. I love where I work now, and I got recruited for this job, but it was a really interesting moment where I got to talk about that because that story went through their entire company. This emotional response to this thing, and there was a point in the next conversation I had that was kind of being yourself and being honest, and how they really appreciated that I did that, and it really took the interview from this moment where people present a fake version of themselves to, oh, this is who Spencer is. I get asked a lot about work from podcast listeners, so I thought I'd take an opportunity to just say that I think that we are in a cultural shift in the workplace where being yourself is actually really important, and people really want the true you at work because you spend the majority of your time with your coworkers. And the Always Improving moment that I had today was realizing that whether or not I get this job as one of the 2 finalists, I really did everything that I could, and coming to terms with that and having acceptance. I did what I could. I presented who I was, and either they want me or they don't. It kind of harkens to what we talked about with Adrian's question. I don't remember if it was last week or a few weeks ago, where you have to be okay with the result, with the preparation you put in, with the decisions that you've made, right? I actually thought about that question around when coming to that conclusion today. It was really impactful.
That's awesome. What was your other Always Improving moment?
I played my first MTGO challenge in years this week. I had so much fun. And the Always Improving moment actually came from needing to familiarize myself with MTGO again in a lot of ways. I'm really good at being hands-on in paper and collecting the information I need to collect, how I need to collect it. The match that I want to specifically talk about was round 2 versus arguably the best dredge player in the world. So I'm playing in Stodeck round 2, and I win game 1. I'm playing pretty well. I just punted game 2 really hard, where I didn't check his graveyard, and he had an Ox in it. And because of that, he got to activate his Ox, and I with a Tormod's Crypt in play. Even at that moment, I still questioned, like, when was the right time to do this? Should I have done it during my turn? Should I have done it during their draw step to let them dredge? Should I have done, like, when should I have done this? And it brought up an interesting conversation that, like, one, I didn't check Select Graveyard. I should have. I think I saw Stinkweed Imp and just assumed that was the next turn. Like, I was going to wait for that, but in paper I would have. So why didn't I on MTGO? You know, it put me on to 1-1 in the tournament. I could have been 2-0 after beating a very good player to really set my tiebreakers up in a good way. Overall, I did pretty well. I think I went 5-3 with 2 of my losses being to Murktide and Storm. For context, though, I played Tron. Storm is literally unwinnable for what it's worth. I played 3 main deck relics, and I still didn't think that there was like a world in which I win that matchup. And Murktide also felt really bad. The fact that they are a Spell Pierce deck is pretty bad for the current iteration of Tron. If there was one change I would make to the deck, I would cut a Nature's Claim in the sideboard for a Cavern of Souls and kind of play the games a little bit differently. It was a really cool event to like get back into MTGO, set my stops correctly, the way that I like them. And it was a good learning experience. I know that there's an announcement on the 31st for the future of the OP, but legitimately I do think that like challenges are something that I've wanted to do for a long time. I got the buy-in from my wife to let me do it, and cashing this one and getting to kind of continue going forward is pretty cool. If you want to look at the list that I played, it just took second at an energy. I played that exact 75, and that's the only change that I can think of right now. That was my Magic Always Improving moment. It's just like taking the moment to like play MTGO like you would play paper, I think is pretty important.
Yeah, especially for a deck like Tron, which allocates you the time to do so.
I literally walked downstairs after round 1, and my wife's like, "What happened? Why are you down here?" And it had been like maybe 11 minutes. And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Is everything okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I won." She's like, "Oh, okay." I had 5 matches finish in 15 minutes or less, so.
I once played a modern challenge with Tron where I started playing, and I was like, I promised a friend I'd meet him at the LGS later. So I won my round, drove 30 minutes to the LGS, played that round at the LGS, hung out with him, played another round at the LGS, hung out with him, played the next round, won it, was live for top 8, drove home, was like 2 minutes late to the round, got on my computer and played it.
Straight up, I went to the store twice during that modern challenge.
Heck yeah, that's it.
Like, went to the liquor store. So after round 1, went and drove and got rock stars to like kind of get my caffeine in my system. Went to the liquor store. So I guess I went to the store 3 times, and then I also picked up your food another round. Like that, Tron's both very easy to play, quite strong, and pretty fast.
My always improving moment comes from getting ready for Pioneer. So I have a pretty hot take that isn't always true, as we're going to reinforce today, but that is that if you could be playing Control, you probably can find a better deck in the format. It's probably not the thing to be doing. There's no cancel that's going to fix your deck. Having Absorb isn't going to make your Pioneer deck great or whatever. But the Wandering Emperor had me looking at blue-white, and I was like, dang, I think blue-white's really good. They're going to break my vow. That like not play Control, be doing something better, somewhere I can leverage a bit more stuff, and was super impressed with blue-white Control and Pioneer, and being willing to break the heuristics and challenge myself. It was the always improving moment, and I love that deck. I'm playing a team tournament at SCG Indy this weekend, so also if you see me, say hey. I'm hoping I don't get to play Pioneer on Sunday, so that we make day 2, but it's a win-win weekend for me, because I'm going to play blue-white Control on Sunday if things don't go well.
I can't tell if you actually had an always improving moment, because like you gave horrible advice before it.
Well, then the always improving is that he's listening to that.
Oh,
he's deviating away from that horrible advice he gives everyone.
All right.
And he's letting himself play blue-white Control. Am I getting that right, Mason?
Well, the thing was, I had said never play Control or whatever because it's bad.
You're still saying it was such gusto and confidence.
Well, because you're if you follow this advice, you'll be more right than you are wrong. But the always improving moment is to still challenge yourself on things that you believe to be true or whatever, and be willing to check yourself and see when you're wrong. And I was wrong. I think blue-white Control, at least a couple days ago, maybe even in this weekend, is a good deck in Pioneer, if not like one of the best decks. The Wandering Emperor is so strong. Abe and I were talking about whether you play Settle or not earlier, but like even just Memory Deluge Wandering Emperor is such a punishing like interaction
the Glimmer Settle squeeze, but both these cards are better on every turn of the game than Glimmer and Settle.
Wait, can also have Settle in this squeeze. Let's go.
That's what I just said. You weren't listening
I'm
to me.
anti-Settle.
I was talking to Abe Mason.
Yeah, I said Abe and I were discussing about if we should play Settle or not.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'm in the anti-Settle camp, everyone. Maybe I
think
like
I wanna
attacking
set-
with
I
all my
think-
creatures too much, and I'm an inside. It's an inside job, you know.
I do think that this brings up one of those moments on the podcast where we can talk about like a future episode. And if you like this idea, leave a comment. I would love to do an episode where Mason debates Spencer and Abe on controlling.
Well, one of us
Magic.
has to be a middle party on that. I don't want to
Yeah,
have
but,
the
like,
2v1
neither of us-
Mason is built different episode. I mean, I could do it. I would just be snide the whole time.
Legitimately like episodes where we legitimately on the show are talking about things that way would be a good insight for the listener. So if you're interested in that, leave a YouTube comment.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm going to go into my always improving topic. I got to kind of follow up Mason here talking about realizing that you're wrong about something. Let's rewind to last Monday. Lurrus gets banned in Pioneer and Modern. I'm a Hammer Time player. Lurrus, pretty big deal for that deck. Trying to figure out what's going on. And I had this idea that I think when you have an idea, a lot of times you're half right, half wrong, where you could forego all of the blue cards that most people are playing for just access to Reality Chip and Teferi Time Raveler, because Teferi Time Raveler was kind of this lights out piece I think a lot of the decks that you were worried about wouldn't be prepared for. And that part of it was true. What I forgot, however, and I learned again in my time playing some leagues and really testing out these ideas in the wild, was that Modern is, 1/3 the decks that you think about and expect, and 2/3 the decks that you can just never predict. They're not the things you expect. You can't write out the Modern meta and be like, these are the only decks I'm going to play. And I'd kind of forgotten about that simple rule of the format, and was telling Mason that I was like, I am never, ever registering a Spell Pierce in my Hammer deck.
Was this before or after the literal conversation the three of us had where I said Spell Pierce was cracked?
This was
deck.
after. I still disbelieved. I was like, I
Whoa!
refuse to play Spell Pierce. I think it makes no sense. Which is kind of, it's that old like philosophy of like, oh, you should like try to play cards in your 75 that fit with your plan A first. If you're playing a burn deck, you want to play more Smash Smithereens than something like Shattering Spree, because even though Shattering Spree does more, you need to fit your game plan, right? So that was my thinking, is that if Teferi can be this lights out card against all of the fair decks that I'm thinking about, then that's actually what I want. But I, from playing, realized that, you actually need Spell Pierce because it plays more roles. Like, you need a Spell Pierce or Thoughtseize that can just efficiently interact at the point at which you need it with a bunch of the random decks as well, and I had kind of forgotten about that being such a big function about Thoughtseize in the black decks, and how good it was to have access to an effect like that. And I'm admitting now on the podcast as my always improving moment.
My Hammer Time opponent could have really used a Spell Pierce this weekend in the Modern Challenge for what it's worth.
I only lose to Tron when they gut shot me. So I don't know what Spell Pierce is really helping me there.
I did gut shot my Tron opponent this or my Hammer Time opponent.
It's rough. That Inkmoth Nexus never
There's
saw it
only
coming, dude.
There's only one gut shot in the 75 that I played, but I definitely brought it into the Hammer Time and got him.
Like I said, it's the only thing I lose to out of Tron. I think that matchup's good. A of that always improving was taking the time to really sit down and think about the play patterns and how it plays out. But B was also going through the work of testing that assumption and, coming around to the idea that maybe that I was oversimplifying things and that I was wrong about it, and why really was what I've been thinking about for this week as I get into my next week of getting better every day.
Yeah, let's move on to the Patreon shout out. I told Abe I wouldn't tell him I told him so in the podcast, so I won't tell him I told him so. Let's give a big shout out to Martin Grant. Thank you so much for becoming a patron of the show. If you wanted to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg, become a patron, and also other benefits like being in the Discord. We talk about deck lists. We had a bunch of conversations about various things in Modern and Pioneer just last Friday. You get to also ask questions, which we'll come back to later in the show.
I just want to give a huge shout out to Martin. I messaged him to check if the new connection to the Discord was working. He's like, "Oh, I don't know. I haven't even looked yet." Because he's in one of the tiers where you get that, right? Because you have to be, I think it's 5 or more to get that. He's like, "You read my comment, my YouTube comment on the show, and the way you guys did it was super cool. Supporting the creators that you love is something that I try to do, and I just really appreciate that you didn't even look at the benefits. You were just like, this has brought me value and entertainment, and I don't know. I just think that's awesome.
Thanks for the cash. Let's go into some housekeeping. Thank you for supporting the show. I can't be emotionally vulnerable. Instead, I'll make a joke. But we need to do some housekeeping, Spencer.
Yeah, so we have two things to talk about. The first is the schedule for the release of the show. And one of the things that I try to really care about in my interactions with people is the understanding that everybody's human. We asked our editor when we hired an editor for this show recently to have a 24-hour turnaround time. He had to bring in other people. It still wasn't meeting his expectations or ours, and we had a real conversation about it, and we will no longer try to be releasing on Wednesdays, but instead try to be releasing on Thursdays. Our editor doesn't just edit our show, they edit Common Knowledge, they edit Drafting Archetypes, they have a full-time job. To be fair, if I was editing the show, it would probably also come out on Wednesday or Thursday still. It's not like there's that big of a difference other than the fact that I'm a busy person. While you used to be able to expect the show on your drive to work on Thursdays, you will now more likely expect it on your drive home on Thursdays. The other one is a Patreon announcement, just that we are going to be ordering the wristbands that people loved in the past and be shipping them out as soon as possible. I should be ordering them probably here in the next 2 weeks. I changed how I did wristbands with the other podcast I do, Arena Mythicast. So I wanted kind of to do something different for this one, but I kind of have an idea now. We'll be ordering those and ship them out as soon as possible. Just wanted to let the patrons of the show know. Those will be coming. It is March, which is the time frame in which we promised those. So I'll be ordering them and then shipping them as soon as I get them.
Awesome, great. Well, let's move on to our main topic. We're going to talk about the Neon Dynasty Set Championship that just happened this past weekend. Set Championships are the Pro Tours, essentially, if you haven't been keeping up with the vernacular. And this format was a split format, Historic and Alchemy. So Historic, an arena-only format with a diverse card pool, and Alchemy is sort of standard plus the Alchemy cards with some changes and stuff, which has some pretty interesting impacts on the format. I think it's probably best if we start with Alchemy. So I think that's the format that most people know, and then we'll kind of break that stuff down. Then we're going to talk about the Alchemy stuff after that, besides the overall picture. But before we get going, huge shout out to the Zoomers. Zach got second, losing to Eli Cassis in the finals, and qualified for Worlds, and has the classic Andre Straussky moment of I'm quitting Magic to focus on college. It's my first semester. Wins the PTQ that he did there and is now qualified for Worlds. So kids, if you want to do better in Magic, just quit.
There were two Zoomers in top 8, and they showed the MTGO numbers from the Zoomers. MTGO players did the best at this event, other than MPL members' MTGO qualifications was the order.
To keep it a stack for the listeners, I've looked at everything, but I only watched the finals. I technically saw part of round 1 as well, so I didn't see this exact thing, but I saw something like that going around on Twitter.
One of our listeners was a teammate of Zach's and Henry. I love seeing the Youngblood doing well. I think that certain pros might have tweeted some nasty things this weekend about the Youngblood. I think it's cool. I love seeing it. I know the amount of work that these, kind of dumb to call them kids now, right? Because they're all not kids anymore because they're all qualified for the Pro Tour, which you have to be 18 for. But I think that it's cool to see these people that have put in a ton of work over the past few years and now finally get their shot at the Pro Tour due to the rules, crushing it. I just think it's awesome.
I don't know. I think it makes perfect sense to me intuitively that the people who perform the best outside of the people who are just spending years playing professionally are the people who play with everyone else who's so serious about it that they continue to play on Magic Online all the time. The names you'll see in Magic Online events, not even just the young blood, but some of the old guard who still play there, the opportunity they get to really test themselves against the best on Magic Online, regardless of format. These are two arena only formats they played at this PT that you can't play on Magic Online, but the people who qualified from that performing so well does not surprise me at all.
Looking at the decks themselves, so when it came to Historic, the most brought deck was Izzet Phoenix at 24%, and then there's a spattering of other decks around the 9 to 5%, including Azorius, Golgari Food, Orzhov Auras, Jeskai Control, other Auras, and Rakdos variants. I'm really surprised by everything that kind of showed up when it came to Historic. I have always thought the Phoenix deck is a little mopey, in Historic, and I've always found the Aura decks to be really good. And the data does kind of support that a little bit, not to jump the gun too much, but the Orzhov deck did quite well. I'm sorry, the Azorius Auras deck did quite well, win percentage-wise, and Orzhov Auras did quite well as well. Not quite as good as that, though. But what do y'all think about this sort of showing from Historic?
We obviously see the metagame share of 25% of it being Phoenix. I've never thought Phoenix was the best deck in Historic. Like, to me, the best decks, in my opinion, are Golgari Food, some kind of Ars deck. I think that you can build Gruul in so many different ways, it's kind of hard to say, like, which ones are good. But I was pretty shocked by this. Like, I think Rakdos decks at large are super overrated in Historic. I think that Phoenix, while is, I think, a good deck, it might even be tier 1. It seemed super overrepresented in this field, especially for a format where you expect people to become ready for it. And then the last one I think that's just super overplayed was 5-color Niv. I just have never understood the appeal of that deck. That one only had like 1.7% looking at the metagame share. The Jeskai control deck makes a lot of sense to me. Like, I don't know how many of the Jeskai decks they combined, right? We've talked about it on this podcast. I might have even done a deck tech or streamed the is it Indomitable Creativity versions. So I don't know how they stack those, or if it's just straight up like it's blue-white with Lightning Helix. Those decks have always been tier 2 to me, though, right? Like, after they banned Memory Lapse. I also just think that Yorion is unplayable in Historic, and I was surprised to see people bring it.
I think the Wandering Emperor does a lot to help these control decks, by the way. I know I mentioned that card earlier in Pioneer. I think that is a card that I was pretty high on in our set review. I was pretty high on in my articles. And I think that I underestimated it by a lot. And it's funny because I was having this conversation on Thursday with somebody, and then Sam Black on Saturday did the same tweet he did when we found out Oko was one of the best planeswalkers of all time, and tweeted like, "How good do you think the Wandering Emperor is?" And I was like, flashbacks. But I think the Wandering Emperor is really, really good, and I think it does a lot to fix a lot of the metagame problems in Alchemy for those decks. Memory Lapse was really crucial for backbreaking turns, so I think the Wandering Emperor, while different, fills a similar role of letting you answer those bigger late game things and also kind of like stymie some progression on their part.
We're going to get into this in both of these, so we might as well just talk about Wandering Emperor for a minute. That card is good in control, it's good in mid-range, it's good in aggro.
It feels like 2022 Restoration Angel, you know? It's just playing a role. It's good when it's good. You get a little bit of value here, a little bit of something for your investment now, up front. You get a little payoff in the long run, too.
I've probably played well over 100 games with and against that card, and I already have had multiple turns with and against it where I didn't even think of the full implications of kill your thing, put a token on something, or kill my thing, make a guy, whatever it was. I just underestimated it multiple. I knew the 2-turn sequence, but I didn't understand the cascading effects of just an extra activation in a lot of cases.
Along those lines, I think that's part of why the Yorion got to take up as well, Spencer. Is flickering your Wandering Emperor lets you use it twice in a turn.
Yeah, you can use it in that end step.
End of turn, flash in, kill your thing, put a counter on my thing, Yorion, flicker these, kill your thing again, go. All right, it's over.
It's my turn again now, finally.
Moment for me. Just now on the podcast, I had an always improving moment. I had not considered those implications.
Flickering walkers is normally really bad, so I don't blame you.
I need to look at these decks, but are the blue-white versions in Historic enchantment decks with the blue-white planeswalker? The one that makes the shards?
Nico Aris, yeah.
If you can play Wandering Emperor, that planeswalker, the 3/4 Archon, a bunch of enchantments with flash, like the Omens, right? That actually sounds like a strong deck. Blue-white control did pretty bad at this event in Historic.
There's too much hostility to it, but the Wandering Emperor does a lot to make the deck playable. I also think the Alchemy only card, the board wipe, does a lot to help too, and pushes out a lot of decks. The Divine Purge, thank you. That card goes a long way, but it's still not enough. Things like Phoenix punish that card.
I also would be interested how many March of Otherworldly Light these Historic decks were playing too. Because I think that card's super underrated across the board.
Seen a lot of 3 to 4 in the lists just scrolling through.
Both the white legendary land and the blue legendary land are cracked. The more we're talking about this, you guys are talking me into really going at it.
I have just bought 4 Wandering Approach from Oasis games while we were talking about this, because I had forgotten. Yeah. When you can use code, would that be good to get 5% off your shipping, just like I did?
You could play in our event. We're running a 1K in the next quarter. Should we move on to Alchemy? I feel like we talked about Historic a lot.
Before we move on to Abe, whatever you want to say as well, I think the food decks are still good. They've just got some problems, and their matchups are polarized, and I think the data kind of shows that.
Part of the reason that Phoenix was the most represented deck is that some of these archetypes, if you look at the breakdowns, like if you were to combine Jeskai and Blue-Eye Control, which are kind of the same idea, but Jeskai has some more spot removal to make, like that's cheaper to help with some of the more targeted matchups for that. It starts to condense a little bit, but I think Phoenix was just the path of least resistance, same with food. And when it comes to a format like Historic, that's really open and there's a lot of possibility and a lot of option for change. I would probably feel better about registering a deck like Phoenix, where I feel like I have a lot more agency, than registering something like Auras, where I feel like if my opponent shows up with a plan, maybe I'm just dead.
What would you two have registered in Alchemy and Historic?
I definitely would have played an Auras deck in Historic. I'm pretty sure Lightpaw was going to crack that deck. I just haven't had a lot of time to actually put in to playing that, but I think if I couldn't test, I would play Orzhov Auras with Lightpaw, Saram, and Core Spirit Dancer. And then in Alchemy, I probably would have played a Blood Undercity Connoisseur. Is that the name of the card? I would have played some mid-range deck with that card.
I probably would have played a food deck, or I would have played Auras. I don't really play a ton of the Alchemy card included formats these days, Historic included, so I'd be pretty out of touch, so I'd want to pick something that I understand functionally, that is powerful and proactive, and so.
Sure, I would have ended up on Jund Food in Historic and Mono White in Alchemy. Let's move on to Alchemy, though, Mason.
Yeah, so Mono White, the most played deck, ironically, with almost the same number of people that played Izzet. I wonder how many people are Izzet Mono Whiters. But at 23.1% of the field with 53 decks, we had Mono White aggro. Then we had Naya Runes, which I think a lot of people didn't realize at the masses was actually good in Alchemy. Then we had Orzhov Adventures, which we're going to come back to in 1 second. Mardu Midrange, Azorius Control, and Rakdos Sacrifice all coming in at about 7 to 5% of the field. And before we hop into anything, Abe and I have an agenda to talk about. Let's talk about how many people bashed the balance team for saying, oh, there's adventure cards getting buffed in Alchemy. They're never will see play. Oh, what are they doing? These cards aren't good enough. Making them cost 1 mana less won't matter. And it not only won the Pro Tour, but those cards should have been popular multiple other decks and were a large percentage of the metagame. I think players need to check themselves sometimes, especially if cards start costing 1 less mana.
The amount of hate towards those balance changes that I saw of people being like, why even bother doing this? Why am I getting told that this is happening? And then a team of all of the best Magic players in the world deciding to play decks full of the cards that they rebalanced, being like, oh, let's try it, play it, and finding out that it's good is the exact reason why they do these things. Like, they want to take cards that aren't being played and turn them into cards that will be played. Like, this is honestly the story of the entire event to me, is something that really validates a lot of what the Alchemy team exists for, and like what Alchemy as a format exists for. Decks like this popping up out of cards that would not be able to be played in Standard.
I don't know that I agree with your premise around Naya Ruins. Didn't Naya Ruins like win a Pioneer Challenge or something? I think it did something in an older format that was not Standard.
It definitely wasn't Naya Runes and Pioneer, because I'm on that format like a hawk. But I'll double check myself while you're talking here.
I knew going into this event that Naya Ruins was cracked, and I expected it to be the most played deck.
I know it also won some Week 1 Standard PTQs and stuff.
Yeah,
so.
I had pretty close to zero doubt that Naya Ruins would show up in force. And I think most people in the loop felt that way. So I'm a little surprised to hear you say that. I
think a lot of people from talking to them this weekend were surprised that deck could swing in Historic. In Alchemy. Misspoke.
If you ask the people who played Mono White, they specifically played it to get under Naya Ruins. I've been pushing Mono White in Standard for the exact same reason in our Discord. I'm playing Mono White because it goes underneath this deck. It also lets you play the removal that you need for it. I was not surprised to see those being two of the top decks.
I think you misheard me. I'm saying people who are not in the loop. I went to like a couple local tournament events and people came up to me and they're like, wow, did you see that Naya Runes deck is playable in Alchemy? And I was like, yeah, it's really good.
Can we call Alchemy Toon World?
Not everyone's ready to bear this task, but I am willing to.
Orzhov surprised me just because like I haven't played a ton of Alchemy. The dungeon metagame was something super interesting to watch throughout the tournament, and like there was a lot of interesting stuff in this event. I know that, Mason, you said you only watched the finals. I was listening to the finals as I was playing video games with my son, and it was really interesting. And then I watched, 13 rounds of this event total, whether it was in the background or having it be my main attention. There was a ton, and the Alchemy metagame was extremely different than what I believe the standard metagame is. It is actually a different format. I am not interested in Alchemy any more than I was before. You know, it's our job as people that do a constructed podcast to like try and hype it up, but like I would just rather play standard so that I can have my paper cards and my arena cards do the same thing and be at the same place. That doesn't mean that it wasn't interesting to watch and see how the best players in the world attacked these problems, because I think it was really interesting to see that part. And that is the portion that, like, even if you're a standard player and not an Alchemy player, it's still really interesting to see, like, here's the problems that this format presented in a format that's really similar to a format that I play. How were the problems attacked?
The Alchemy exclusive cards make it a different format. Things like City Stalker Connoisseur, who I was talking about earlier, but thought it was Undercity. That card is really, really good and does a long way in allowing these like Orzhov mid-range decks to actually grind and get the time to go through the dungeon. For those that don't know, City Stalker Connoisseur is a 4-mana 3/3 Death Touch that when ETBs will discard the highest mana value card from the opponent's hands, and then make a blood token on ETB as well. So it always 2-for-1 to your opponent, and then if you ever get to the late game, which your mid-range deck is pretty good at, you start turning lands into spells or moving through your land pocket. So that card is super nice. Stuff like that just isn't part of Standard, will never be part of Standard. It gives it a nice flair, and it's cool to see those cards be role players and not focal points, which I really like.
I don't remember if it was Historic or if it was Alchemy, but like I remember the first time that somebody cast Inquisitor Captain against me, and I was like, what is happening? The formats are different. That's good in a lot of ways. I highlighted the ways that I don't like it, but that doesn't mean that it's not good.
I think it's cool to have formats you can jump between if you're an arena-only gamer. Like, you can play Standard for a couple weeks early on, then you can go to your Historic, then you hop back over to Alchemy. There's been some changes, some new cards. It's a shame that these set changes are coming so close to the next set. Abe, do you have any big thoughts on Alchemy? I know you don't play a lot. And I know you kind of mentioned how this helps sell you on Alchemy having a reason to exist this past weekend.
I think the format as a whole, getting its place to exist in high-level play, you know, left an impression on even Spencer of like, wow, these games were still really sick. There's a lot going on that makes it different from Standard in a way that's good. And just, it was really validating to me as someone who like is a fan of Alchemy as an idea and feels like it can work. It's just not for me. To see that it is working, and even though I still feel like it's not for me for much of the same reason that Spencer does, that it was still something that like was successful and well received by people, and you know, hopefully will continue to be.
Did y'all learn any big things from this tournament? Any breakthrough stuff? The big thing I learned is that gamers love to game. You look at the data on Orzhov Phoenix over here, and is it Phoenix? I don't know why I said Orzhov. And it's fine. It definitely has like the Jund win percentage or whatever of the world, where it's like, you know, plus a little in some, minus a little in others, but people love to play that sort of thing, regardless of how other powerful options are in the format. So
yeah, I mean, probably my biggest takeaway, especially when it comes to Historic, is that the format has kind of reached a stability for the first time. I think there's been so many bannings, these Alchemy cards coming in, but you know, you look at what people kind of expected the big decks to be, and they were the big decks. Food and Phoenix were both huge portions of the metagame. You know, both had medium-ish results, and they were kind of like the safe picks of the tournament. Kind of feels like that format is reaching a place where it's not getting shaken up by like, oh, something new happened. And also that it still remains better to be proactive in a format like that than really reactive, as all the control decks look like they got kind of smushed either by like their own arms race, or then in some percentage of that, the decks like Auras and like, or just decks that had the ability to be very proactive were just much better across the board in that metagame.
I remembered mine, and I have three specific ones. The first one that I'll mention is the win percentages of some of the decks against certain decks. I mentioned that I thought that Jeskai Control was like a literal top deck in Historic, and this could be a symptom of Arena, right? To me, like, my win percentage with Jeskai in Historic is really high, regardless of the version that I'm playing, whether it's just straight control with Prismari Command or Lightning Helix and stuff. I mean, I think I even have a deck list floating around the Discord where like I just cut Yorion and played blue-white control or Jeskai control or something, and was like, just cut Yorion and play this list. I won my first 10 matches. It was super easy. I was surprised by some of the win percentages, specifically in Historic. That was a learning moment for me. Two of the other big ones is, one, I might have talked about this on the podcast, and I will continue to do this for as long as I do it. And if you hate it, leave a comment and let me know. but like there was a really big analog to Super Smash Brothers in this tournament, and it had to do with switching dungeons. I think it was in the finals. Eli switched which dungeon he was going to. And this is something that has come up a lot for me in Smash Bros, where you have to evaluate what are you doing that's not working and what are you doing that's working, and then adjust. In Magic and in Smash, I get caught up in like my game plan. And it was really impressive to see people switching their game plans mid-set or match. Because it's not something that I'm good at. And like seeing it happen in Magic when I've seen it happen so many times in an analog to Magic for me was huge, always improving moment. Like something that I know that I've done wrong, where I've hung on to game plans that just aren't going to work with either the context of my opening 7 or with where the game is at right now, and understanding when to pivot. Like that was huge for me. And then the third one is just how important deck building was in this tournament. How people are using the legendary lands, seeing how people are building their decks according to the alchemy cards. Between both of the formats, not just alchemy, but like these arena only cards, deck building played a huge role in this event. And it was a good reminder to me to like, I don't know, not be lazy. It's kind of what it was. So those are my 3.
That's always my biggest takeaway at every PT, I feel like, is that deck building matters so much more than I already think it does, to the point where like it's what sets people apart so much, is when they can build a really solid cohesive 75 and it works out, like when all their decisions come together. That's really what separates players so much at that level.
That's really important too, though, because like I feel like so often people just try to get too cute, right? They're like, well, I just want to be different, so I just changed this card so my list was different. But like the actual goal, right, is to present the thing that works.
Well, that's going to do it for our main topic here, talking about Neon Dynasty. Let's move quickly into our Patreon question. If you want to support us, you go to patreon.com/CCMTG. Adrian asks, CCMTG talks a lot about macro, having a plan, sideboarding, and all that. But my question is about the other big game in Magic, the micro decisions. More specifically, adapting your overall plan to micro things in the game, or if your opponent prioritizes something you don't. Spencer just talked about how he has a hard time with that sometimes in games, where adapting your plan on the fly. And I think that it is a pretty hard thing to do, especially if you're not being an active participant in the game and you're autopiloting in a turn. You're like, oh yeah, this matchup comes down to a lot to about them not resolving Thought Knot Seer, so I'm going to be counterspelling Thought Knot Seers and calling their creators, and that's it. And then like, they're kind of leaning in on your life total, and it's like, oh wait, maybe they have like Reality Smasher. I need to be planning my game differently and that sort of thing. It's really hard to come up with a lot of things to talk about it in great detail here, but I would say to talk about what we did a couple weeks ago with like having the heuristics and the plans. Double checking your work is really important, and what you think you know about stuff. And think about a lot of good players play to what their hand's telling them and not to what they think the game plan is. And if your opponent's doing something, there's probably a reason for that. And if they're really good, it might be because they're like, hey, yeah, this is normally a control matchup, but my hand literally just has all the aggro cards I have, so I have to beat you down. And think about how that changes your stuff would be my quick thing.
Yeah, there was a Grand Prix trial that Matt Kling was playing in where he and his opponent both had a Consecrated Sphinx in play. And they did that dance for a second. Matt kept going, and his opponent stopped, and then his opponent went Thought Scour, Snapcaster, Thought Scour, Thought Scour, Snapcaster, Thought Scour, Snapcaster, Thought Scour, Snapcaster, Thought Scour. And, like, Matt died. And it was one of those things where, like, that's the moment where his opponent pivoted to, all right, we both draw on our decks. How do we win from here? And his opponent quickly identified the micro, right? Like, this is what this game has now become about. And Matt did not. And that, I don't know if there's a better example of that pivot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the times the macro is what influences your micro. Like a classic one of this that's happened in the last 5 years or so was like, do I attack my opponent or do I attack the Teferi Hero of Dominaria? They're plussing every turn. Let's say you're the Teferi player, your opponent choosing to attack the Teferi instead of you, that tells you something about what their game plan is or how they expect the game to progress. They think that's going to go long enough that the Teferi being in play is a bigger problem than you having life points, and they think they're going to lose that. Or, maybe you're playing a match and you think the matchup's some way, but your opponent thinks it's another. Like, if your opponent has discard in their deck still, that tells you that they think the game's more about casting discard spells in the early game. Like, that's their micro. So you should adapt your sideboarding plan to make sure that you're the most resilient build to them like you should be top decking the best possible because you know that they're going to have these discard spells. And normally, while you might be able to count on holding on to an extra piece of removal or two because it's just going to sit there until the threats show up, they don't want that to happen because they're leaving in all this discard spells, so they're going to find ways to use them. So, adapting to the things that you're being shown by your opponent in that way.
I don't remember it was a conversation I had with LSV or Paulo, but I think that people don't give their opponents enough credit, and when they don't give their opponents enough credit, you end up trapped. If your opponent's doing something actually dumb, I think you're more likely to see it than assuming your opponent is bad. So you should assume the best in your opponent.
Yeah, if your opponent's bad and is making bad plays, you should, in theory, win the game. Let's move on to our YouTube question we got from old William Dixon. William said, just wanted to say thank you for doing the show. Just recently started listening, and I'm really enjoying the content. Thank you, William, for interacting and telling us that. That means a lot.
Just leaving this comment is so good for the YouTube algorithm. It's where we're trying to grow the show right now, and it's really appreciated. That's why I put it in the show. Also, this is our lifeblood. Getting these type of comments, like, I just started listening. We had some patrons talking about how many times they listen to episodes and go back to them in the Discord this week.
It's the best feeling to read that, honestly.
An unreal amount of, is it dopamine or serotonin? I don't know what it was, but like, I was high all day, fan.
Good brain chemicals all over the place.
That's going to do it for this week's episode. If you enjoyed this show, you should check out the other shows on the network. We have Common Knowledge, a Popper podcast, and our Drafting Archetypes, which is a draft-focused podcast with Samuel Black. Those are both two really, really good shows. And we also have Mythic Cast, which is a bi-weekly show hosted by Spencer, where they kind of interview people with arena stuff. That's a great show to listen to. I think y'all are on episode only 1, right? This should be episode 2 this week, correct? For the return. I know you're on a deeper episode, but the return.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
The new season.
We're going to be diving deep into maybe like a power rankings episode of the arena formats this week. It should be fun. So like if you're into Historic or Alchemy or like arena formats and want to deep dive into the data itself, that'll be an episode for you to listen to. I thought you were saying my show wasn't good for what it's worth. You're like, 2 great shows, and then you have Mythic Cast.
Well, I'm not going to lie. I forgot Mythic Cast started back up again. I'm on life support right now. If you like this show and you want to support the show will always be free. You can go to patreon.com/ccmgg if you want to throw some monetary value. I always mention that part. But if you want to help out the show in other ways too, like we mentioned, you can like the show on the various social media stuff, share with friends, go and click on that YouTube, let the video play for a little bit, have a good day, see our faces while you watch it. All that stuff really helps us a lot. Spencer, if someone wants to find you, where can they go?
You can find me on Twitter at Spencer13H. You can find me every other week on my 2 other podcasts, which is Mythicast and Arena Mythicast. You can also find me sending support packages to Mason wherever I can do so. This kid is dying. We might need to start a GoFundMe for him to get some new nasal passages. Like, this dude coming out strong. He's throwing the Dayquil. Is that generic Dayquil or real Dayquil?
This is brand name. Only the best for me.
Dude.
That's the Patreon dollars went this month, baby.
Woo! Both Mason and I were not feeling it this week. I got super into it, but Mason has been dying this episode, and I just want to just give him a huge shout out because you got to support your homies when they're like doing this kind of stuff, and I really appreciate that. I have started my deck techs again on the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel, and the second Mason is feeling better, he's actually going to do a deep dive with me on, I don't actually know if it's always 4-color.
Basically always 4-color. Black sucks.
We're going to do the same thing that we did with Abe, where he's going to teach me 4-color and coach me on it.
Yeah, those videos are incredibly good.
I even already have the deck on MTGO Mason, so it'll be real easy.
Heck yeah. I hope you use code 62 and single at checkout with Mana Traders. That way you get 15% off your first 2 months.
What a liar. Do you know that there was a world in which you wouldn't be allowed to play Magic right now? Because if you were dating a Wizards employee, you wouldn't be allowed to play in tournaments anymore at one point in time.
I'll have you know that as long as we don't live together, it doesn't matter.
Oh, is that the rule?
That is the rule. Yep. The rules.
That wasn't always the rule.
As long as I do not live in the same house as Carmen, I am A-okay to play Magic. So y'all suckers are going to have to see me at tournaments. You can find me at your local tournament living my best life each and every week. You can also find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark and find me here each and every week along with my Card Kingdom articles. This Thursday, Modern. Hey, what about you?
You can find me at twitter.com/morenothings. Tweet about whatever I like. And also Tree of Tales MTG on Twitter and on Blogspot. You can check out my blog for tournament reports. Always looking for your tournament reports too. If you are interested in telling me about how much you learned and did #always improving at your local tournament or just had a great time and wanted to talk about it, you should send an email over to the email on that account, and we can get your story up there. Really just trying to bring your stories to the rest of the people, keep grassroots Magic alive. That's it for me, and I think that's it for this week. So everyone have a great one.